Hi, welcome back to Biz Jet TV. It's Fab Poli here today, and we're going to be talking about millennials and biz jets. But before we get into today's episode, if you haven't subscribed to Biz Jet TV, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, all about business aviation. Lots of interesting content here. Please comment below after this episode. We love to hear your feedback, and we love to see the chatter that goes on below the videos. It's always interesting to see what the discussions that come out as a result of what we're publishing here on Biz Jet TV. Also give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. At the end of it, have a look around and see the other content as well. I'm sure there's other stuff here that would be of value to you. Well, let's get into today's episode, all about millennials and biz jets. European Business Aviation Association just recently published a study they did. They went out and they interviewed a number of millennials across Europe. I went through this report. I thought it was very, very interesting. And there's some interesting data which we're going to be talking about in this episode, which I think is applicable across the world. So if you're watching from Vancouver, Toronto, New York, Dallas, Manila, Tokyo, or Jeddah, I'm sure this is applicable to you too, because your millennials around the world are pretty much connected a lot, and they are thinking in a very similar manner. So let's get in and see what the data says. First interesting piece of information is that 40% said that climate is important. Climate concern is important when they're looking for a business aviation solution. Now, obviously we know that for younger people today, climate is close to the heart. This is the only planet we have at the moment until Elon Musk can take us to Mars and beyond. So we really do need to look after our planet. I did do an episode on the impact business aviation has on climate and my take on that. So click on the link above, which will drive you to that episode, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Next piece of information is that 62% of the millennials said they found business aviation attractive, and they found it attractive for two main reasons. Number one, flexibility, and number two, freedom. The freedom to be able to go anywhere with whoever you want, and the flexibility of being able to go when you want. And that's important. I did do an episode a while back about CEOs and performance and private jets and how private jet travel impacts on the performance of CEOs. And there's some interesting information in that episode. So click on the link above, which will drive you straight there. And I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Next piece of information is that 60% of the people interviewed said that they would share a jet. So here we're going into, sharing a jet, the democratization of private jet travel, which is bringing the cost down. And of course, there's all these fancy apps out there these days. And if you haven't seen the episode on the EBAA of private jets, click on the link above and that will drive you to that. So democratization, digitization, two important things. We know that today young people are very much into their phones and booking on their phones, their Apple Watch, and all this kind of technology that we have today, which we didn't have 20 years ago, is making life easier. It's connecting people across the globe. We've been able to do conference calls across the globe at zero cost, which before we had to do, pick up the telephone. We can do this now from our car, from the beach, from on the top of a mountain. As long as there's a signal there, you can connect with people. So the technology is changing private jet travel as it's changing a lot of other things. But sharing a private jet, I don't think is a good idea unless you're sharing with people that you know. But if you're going to share from an app with people that you don't know, because the airplane's leaving tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock from Malaga, from London, and there's 3 seats available. You want to buy 2 seats, one for you and your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever it may be. I don't think that's a good idea. If you're going to be using a private jet, it needs to stay private. So you're either flying yourself, with your colleagues, or with a group of friends, whatever it may be. But as long as you know who these people are on the airplane, then the jet sharing can work and obviously drive the cost down. So that's important. The other interesting piece of data, actually the most interesting that at least I found, was that 46% of the millennials that were interviewed said that they would travel on a flying vehicle which was piloted by artificial intelligence, basically with no pilot. And I thought 46%? I thought that number was going to be around about 20%. But it's interesting to see the millennials would get on to a flying vehicle without a pilot. Now, I think this number is going to come down. If you take, the 3-4-year-olds of today, when they're 25, 30 years old, we'll probably, if we ask that question in 20 years' time, the answer will probably be 80, 90%. Because they're getting more used to, getting in a car that drives it by itself, telling the car where you want to go, and it takes you, getting into the flying machine, it takes you from A to B. this is where we're going. So if you haven't clicked on the link of the airplanes of the future and that, click on that link above, because there's some interesting stuff coming out in the next few years, and you may want to look into that. But let's get back into the whole democratization, digitization thing. Now, if we take, for example, a country like Brazil, which is the second largest emerging economy in the world, and we're going to be doing a whole episode about Brazil and private jets, and you'll understand a little bit in a minute where we're going to be dedicating a whole episode to this. But in Brazil, there are only 121 airports serviced by the airlines, but there are actually 2,460 airports altogether. So obviously, if you live in one of these locations which is not serviced by the airlines, but you have a local airport, it may be a good idea to use private jet travel because it can get you around. Also, the other thing connected to this whole thing of the 2,460 airports, if you're thinking of using a private jet and you're coming to the table and trying to make the decision together with your CFO, the CFO is going to turn around and tell you it's going to cost too much money because they're thinking in a linear fashion. Well, you need to approach it and think of it laterally. And the way you would do, if you're looking at these 2,460 airports, you would ask yourself the question, out of all these locations, where could I potentially go to do business and expand my business? And if you look at these 2,460 airports and you find maybe 400 locations where you could go and do business. Now, some of these locations, you could hop out of Sao Paulo in the morning, for example, or let's say you live at one of these locations, and you go to 3 or 4 different locations in one day and be back in the evening for dinner with your friends. Now, if you were to do this 2 or 3 times a week, you could be visiting 8 to 12 different locations a week, which with the airlines, you'd only probably be able to visit 2 or 3. So you really are going to exponentially grow your business or take your business, give it that quantum jump. And that's why I call Biz Jet TV your quantum key. The Biz Jet is your quantum key. It gives you that quantum advantage, which you don't get when you fly with the airlines. So when you're looking at the balance sheet, you can't really measure this before, but you can measure it after a year where you've suddenly been visiting 12 locations a week instead of 4 or 3, okay? As a result of that, you're doing more business. How much money has that business translated into? So if you are a millennial and you're watching this, that's an interesting piece of data. The other thing that has been found is that millennials don't like to buy houses. They don't like to buy cars. They like to rent houses because they move about a lot. And they like to rent cars, or let's say lease cars. If you live in a big city like New York, for example, you may not need a car. You just Uber when you need to go from A to B or jump on the subway, and you may just rent a car once or twice a month when you're going outside of New York for the weekend or something like that. There's a lot of that going on. But also with the private jet, a lot of millennials think, well, you know what? I don't want to go and buy a jet because, my business is growing so quickly that maybe today if I buy a jet, in a year's time, I need a bigger jet or a different jet that does different things. So they look at the leasing option. This is where, I've been doing a lot of these recently. And we are going out now and buying a bunch of aircraft, which we're going to be offering out on the market to lease. And when I say lease, anywhere between 3 months to 36 months. So if you are living in a country like Brazil, or you want to go and do business in Brazil, or maybe another emerging economy, you may want to be going in and out with a private jet. And the lease option, in particular for the millennials like to lease cars, they like to lease houses and jets. And if you haven't seen the episode on fractional ownership, that's another thing which is very attractive to this demographic. Click on the link above and you go and see my take and some interesting stats on the whole fractional ownership market and how that's going. So that's really all about, the millennials and business aviation. Down below, you'll also find the link to the paper you can download from the European Business Aviation Association on this subject, which I've covered in this episode. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this delivered value to you and your business and started to make you think laterally and not in a linear fashion, but in a lateral fashion or circular fashion or spiralized fashion, however you want to call it, because this is really the way forward for business, is to think in a lateral way. It's really, really important. So if you haven't subscribed to Biz Jet TV, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, comment below, give us a thumbs up. And that's all from Fab Poli at Biz Jet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.